Sorry, new sound system. I'm not sure what the protocol is on how I silence that one. Yeah, I hit the button, so I hope it will. Sure, we'll call it. It's good. I want us to think this evening about contentment and how many times when we think about contentment, we rightly think of the Christian virtue of contentment. And Paul's words in Philippians 4, when he's discussing, in essence, what prompted him to write the Philippian letter. And that was the gift that he had received. And in that discussion, he says, look, I know how to survive both ways. I know how to be full, and I know how to have nothing. And the secret to that is Jesus. Okay, verse 13, the text, what it means contextually is the secret to contentment is Jesus. And if you realize you have him, you can handle the situation, whether it be high, whether it be low, or anything in between. And so, rightfully so, we talk about the virtue of contentment. However, there are other areas where we have to learn to never be content. We have to learn to never be content. We're not satisfied, or where sometimes we can confuse contentment with complacency. And those are two different things. And learning how to navigate and learning how to thread that needle, so to speak, is something that becomes vitally important. And so tonight I want us to look at three particular areas about where we learn to never be content. One of them we hit on pretty heavily a few Sunday nights ago, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time discussing it. I forget the actual title to the sermon, but it was dealing with Philippians 3 and Paul's obsession with knowing who Jesus was and becoming like him. But the three areas I want us to address tonight deal with when you look at the church, not growing complacent, not being content with what is, okay? Then our relationship with God, and that's the study we did a few Sunday nights ago. And then we want to look at our marriage relationships and why we keep pressing forward and we keep trying to do that at a higher level. So as we think, first of all, about this in a congregational setting, there is a church that's well known for its complacency, or we would call it lukewarmness based upon the context. And so in Revelation chapter 3, Jesus, this is the final of the 7 churches, when he discusses Laodicea, beginning in verse 14, he says, "And to the angel of the church in Laodicea write, the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of God's creation. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. Would that you were either cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither cold or hot, I will spit you out of my mouth." Okay, cold and hot sometimes have been translated as cold being really negative toward God and hot being really positive toward God. That's not really the point of what he's saying. The point of what he's saying is water, cold water has a really good purpose. Hot water has a really good purpose. Lukewarm water has no purpose. And so he's not saying, I wish you would be on fire for Jesus or just be totally against him. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, I wish you were cold or hot, because both of them served a purpose, but you're lukewarm, and thus it's unusable. And so he begins to then describe their situation. Verse 17. For you say, notice, you say, this is your assessment of your situation. You say, I am rich, I have prospered, and I need nothing. That's how they view their situation. We're good. We are absolutely golden. And then he says this, not realizing that you are wretched, pitiable, poor, blind, and naked. You see, you look at your situation and you think, we're doing great. Jesus says, you're on life support. It is not what you think it is. And you see, that's the danger when we get into some of these things and we get into all of us have this, we kind of have this intuition to relent. Like we know how to go really hard to do what needs to be accomplished. But as we get that accomplished, we kind of have this releasing factor that says, well, we've gotten it accomplished, so we're just going to sit back now. For an example, one of the well-known things concerning this in church work is if a congregation is trying to, let's say, get out of, let's say they started as a new congregation and they're meeting in a schoolhouse or an old abandoned building or business or something, and then they're constantly working toward this goal of providing a site and building a church building. One of the dangers that is faced in that moment is everybody works incredibly hard to get to that moment where the building has been built and they are there and they are in it. And some of those churches tend to fail immediately thereafter. Because the same sense of drive that led them to accomplish something, once they accomplished it, they thought, well, we built it. And so the work ends. They have that releasing mechanism. We've accomplished what we want to accomplish, and so they just release. They lose their sense of intensity and focus on the things that matter. So, being content with where we are, or being complacent. And I think when it comes to church work, it's never going to be, we can take satisfaction in progress that is being made. Okay? And I think there's the challenge. Take satisfaction in progress that is being made as a local church. But you can't rest on the fact, well, you know, we've done some things and we're doing better than we were. Okay? What is the number one enemy of greatness? Just being good. That's the number one enemy of greatness, just in general in life. That's what keeps people from becoming great and accomplishing great things, is because they look at the good things and go, hey, I'm doing all right. When what is in front of them is so much bigger and they could accomplish so much more if they would refuse to settle for goodness when greatness is within their grasp. And so, for an example, as we walk through this, some of these things in churches, you can think about evangelistic models where you try and reach people, and we say, well, you know, we've reached quite a few people, and we kind of rest on that. We've had maybe a good year, a good 5 years where we have rested, where we have reached a lot of people with the gospel, and they've been brought in and integrated, and that's a good thing. And so that sense of intensity kind of begins to wane. Or, okay, yeah, we brought people in, but, you know, part of the Great Commission is more than just bringing people in. It's sustaining people. It's making disciples out of them, helping them to grow and to develop. You think about the church's presence within a local community. Acts 2 and verse 47, the earliest church, it says of them, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord was adding day by day those who were being saved. How do you have a good reputation amongst the people? By the way, unbelieving people who in Jewish communities thought that Christianity was blaspheming Jewish faith. But yet they found a way to have a positive impact in their community. Okay? You see, one of the standards that we have to think about is this. If the church building, if the congregation here closed its doors and it no longer existed, would our community even notice? I'm not making an indictment. I'm saying you have to think about it that way. Because a lot of times, church, we think, well, we're doing good things in the community. But really, if you shuttered the doors and you ended it, would the community feel the impact of our supposed absence? Or is the absence already there, and all we're doing by shuttering the doors is just making it complete? What about the way we deal with education? how we educate in local churches, how we develop. I was sitting a couple of weeks ago. One of the women that works at Heritage, of course, where I'm in school, she is in the process, the formulation of some things that will lead to her dissertation for her Doctor of Ministry degree. And her approach, what she's looking at, is the adult education system in Churches of Christ. And where did they come from? How did they develop? How can we make them more effective? So there were about 10 of us that were in this panel discussion. We were down in the library and chomping snacks and talking shop for quite some time. But you see, what was happening there, and it's not just because this is something she's doing to get a degree. She's looking at legitimately saying, this is where we are. And a lot of times we continue where we are because we're afraid of asking the question of, what if we did it differently? What would it look like? And it looks like a whole bunch of work. And that's the way, so for an example, you propose something new and people say, well, that won't work. Well, how do you know? It just won't. That's not an answer. What we're really saying is, I don't want to deal with it because it's incredibly hard to do. If we're serving Jesus and we're passionate about doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, it does not matter how easy or how hard they are. It's about doing them. And so we constantly look back and we constantly think about how we're doing this. We think about activities within local churches, right? We think sometimes that in a local church, we look at and we can fill up people's calendars with activities. Okay? But if you were to really take those activities and distill them down, how many of them are truly spiritually formative in their nature? You see, we make this common mistake that people make all the time in life and in business and in church, and that is we confuse busyness with accomplishment. Oh, well, we're busy. We're doing all kind of stuff. But what are you accomplishing? Look, running on a treadmill may accomplish something if your goal is to maybe take care of your heart health. But it's not going. Running on a treadmill is pointless if you're trying to transport yourself from here across state lines. You're not going to get there. You're busy, but you won't accomplish a thing by staying on a treadmill. And so when it comes to that and looking at, we get this, we have limiting beliefs where we look at things and we say, but that can never be. One of the statements that I think about quite a bit is, the Kennedy brothers would often use it because it was a George Bernard Shaw quote from one of his plays, but they would often use it, especially in the civil rights era of trying to change the American landscape concerning race. But in one of Shaw's plays, there's a discussion that says, or a character in the play says, there are those who look at things the way that they are and they ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask, why not? You see the difference? One of them, why is it this way? Why is it this way? It's pointless. We can't change anything. We can't do anything. Why is it this way? It's a completely passive approach. And it's also very easy to make yourself feel good in. And ultimately, anybody can do that. But the people who actually make changes are the ones who look at it and say, I see reality for what it is. But I also see what can be. And why can it be this? See, that has to become a mentality. And if we are people who believe strongly in the power of God, Ephesians 3, to him who is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, then of all people in this world, we should be the very ones who, when we look at things, we say, why not? Why can't we do it? The first obstacle to accomplishing anything, especially in churches, the first obstacle to accomplishing great things is the hardest obstacle. And that is to get over the barriers we have in our own minds. What about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? That's what we want to do. We want to what about it to death and say, you see, because the what abouts haven't been answered, therefore we can't accomplish it. Wait a minute. Well, I've got an answer for you. What about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this, and what about this? Let me ask you this. What about God? What about God? And we end up making the mistake that the children of Israel made in Numbers 13 and 14. They say, we can't go in and take that land. It's huge, and the people are giants, and we're grasshoppers, and we can't do that. And God is standing over here in the corner the whole time in Numbers 14. He asked Moses and Aaron, how long will you refuse to believe me? How long will you refuse to believe me? I did it for you before. Why is it all of a sudden that now you can almost see God saying, why now are my hands tied? And so when we're looking at churches, we're constantly looking at tweaking, changing, moving, adjusting. And honestly, your dynamic is changing constantly. So you have to constantly make tweaks and adjustments. Sometimes they're huge things. Sometimes they're small things. But you have to constantly stay in that mode of thinking of how do we begin the processes to accomplish the things that matter most, not to us, but the things that matter most to God. So never be content when it comes to things in church work. Yes, celebrate a success. Celebrate it. Something great happens, celebrate it. Don't rest on it. Celebrate it and go back to work. Number 2, when it comes to our relationship with God, it's not something that we should ever be content with where it is. Okay? Paul put it this way in Philippians 3:12 through 14. I do not count myself to have apprehended. I don't count myself to be one who has arrived. But one thing I do, I forget what is behind me, and I continually reach forward to what is before me, that I may lay hold of those things, the things for which Christ Jesus has laid hold on me. And that thing that he's reaching for is Jesus himself. That's what we talked about with Philippians 3:7 through 11. Jesus is the obsession. And so, as the same Paul would put it in 2 Corinthians 3, he says, we all with an unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed from one degree of glory to another. Spending time meditating upon and thinking about who God is continuously rubs off on and changes who we are. And so this concept of, and this is one of the things, if you can ever get a person to give the Bible an honest hearing and get them to see the glimpse, and sometimes there are interview questions and people ask, what is your favorite part about preaching? One of my favorite parts about preaching is to watch the light go off for a person. And that happens at different stages with different people. But inevitably there's this moment where a person, they have an interest, but they're kind of overwhelmed by it. And, it's just a lot of stuff to kind of sort through and do things. And then they catch their first real glimpse of God. They see what people are talking about. And then they get hooked. And they begin this lifelong pursuit of catching another glimpse, of catching another glimpse, of catching another glimpse, of catching another glimpse, of knowing so much so that when you get to a point that when you sit down every day and you open your Bible, you wonder, what new thing, how are you going to see God differently today? Because you know it's going to happen. You're just waiting on it. And that's something where we can never know God enough. And as we talked about in that particular study, I believe that eternity will be a continuous process of us learning more and more about who He is. So we can't be content with our relationship with God. We got to constantly, and it's not because, listen, we're not growing and pushing ourselves to know God better because, if we know Him well enough, we can pass the entrance exam into heaven. It's not the point. We're knowing Him for the sheer joy of knowing Him. Then we come to this final area, and that is in marriage. In Ephesians 5 and verse 33, Paul gives a summary statement to what he's been discussing, which is about marriage relationships, but he also says it's about more than marriage relationships. It's actually about Christ and the church. But in verse 33, he does give this summary statement, and he says, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and the wife see that she respects her husband. This mutual love that is to take place between a husband and a wife. Here's the thing. I mean, it's like any relationship. It goes through a process, okay? One of the reasons why, well, there are many reasons why I believe in premarital counseling, but one of them is you kind of got to get the couple. You want to celebrate with them, but you got to kind of pull their feet back down to the ground a little bit. Everything's just going to be great. Listen, you're right. Marriage is going to be a wonderful thing if you do it the way you're supposed to, both of you participate. But it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. And love goes through this process of maturation where in the beginning it's really a sense of infatuation. You've begun your life together, you're excited about all that entails. And this is where our culture, because we're such a feeling-driven culture, a lot of people give up on their marriages when the feeling goes. And what we're trying to say is, when you give up at that moment, you are robbing yourself of the true joy that's about to come. When you hit those walls with your spouse and you learn to work through them, that's when you begin to find out what love is really about. When you can see clearly the flaws and still choose to love each other. That's what marriage is truly about. And so this deep respect and commitment. Now, some people will never reach that stage because they're too busy keeping a list of everything their spouse needs to fix before they can respect them. And what are they neglecting the whole time? They've got a list, too, that they need to correct. So when it comes to marriage relationships, and it's very easy to do, it is very easy to neglect. Marriages fall apart at two major portions of time. Many of them fall apart in the early years. Early, by I say early, I mean, well, even in the first 12 months up to 24. However long it takes to hit that wall, 12 to 24. And then a lot more of them fall apart about the time kids go to college. That's usually where we see big indicators, big spikes. And part of that has to do with we have lived our whole lives and we built our whole relationship around our kids, and we actually forgot to be married. Look, like it or not, it is a stone cold, rock solid fact. Your kids leave. Your spouse stays. And if you tell me you truly love your children, you will truly love your spouse and protect your relationship so that they don't have to go through some of the issues that they have to go through when you decide, oh, we don't know each other anymore and it's time to just quit and move on. And so when it comes to this, we have to prioritize our spouse. Our children are not going to be, and my generation is the worst of all. We believe every little thing irreparably damages children. I mean, we do. All right? But when you read the Song of Solomon, and you come to the end of the Song of Solomon in chapter 8, verses 6 and 7, you have one of these summary statements, and what you have in the song is a couple who has built their relationship, and they've had their ups and downs like everybody. But they say, set me as a seal upon your heart and a seal upon your arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he'd be utterly despised. You can't buy this. You got to earn it. You can't buy it. Everybody wants it. But a lot of people won't pay the price to earn it. You have to prioritize. Yes, I'm all about your kids are young. They're only young once. I've told you. Me and Facebook Memories have a love-hate relationship. I see how little my kids used to be, and I see how big they are now. And I don't like it, but I'm not going to live in the past and miss their present. But I'm also not going to miss their mother. You have to make each other a priority. If we don't, there are enough activities that will scoop in and steal your time together. The second thing is learning to resolve conflict. In the Song of Solomon, in chapter 2, in verse 15, she says, catch the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, for our vineyards are in blossom. So if you have a vineyard and you have animals that will come through and inevitably take part of what you're growing in your vineyard. But it's not really the big animals that you're all that worried about. Why? Because they can usually stand up on their back paws or do something along those lines, and they can just pluck a few olives or a few grapes or something along those lines. The ones you got to worry about are the little ankle biters, because they can't do that. And because they can't reach up naturally and pull a few, they have to chew it down at its root and jerk the whole thing down. This is the point. A lot of people think what kills marriages are big issues. It's not. Big issues are actually have a higher survival rate than little ones. What kills marriages are little issues that you refuse to address, which then leads to resentment. You lead to resentment in one area, then you get resentment in another area. You hear someone say, well, it's just men, and I want to shake my head. Yes, clearly, it's just men or it's just women. You see how you can so in your mind brand, and think about this. It's all men, it's all women. Wait a minute, you live with one and you're going to talk to me about half the population of the planet? And so if you don't address small issues, they will build resentment and they will build barriers. And if we have this notion that, somehow they should magically be able to read our mind and know what they did, listen, in a perfect world where, fairies existed and rainbows and unicorns, that might be possible. But it's time to grow up. We don't live in that world. We don't live in that world. We don't expect the stranger on the street or the people that go to work to us to read our minds. Why do we expect our spouse? They can't read it. Should they know a little more than the average person? Sure. But they can't read our minds. And then the last thing I would say is this. Study each other. 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7, Peter is talking to, in the opening verses, he's talking to wives with unbelieving husbands in verses 1 through 6. And then he turns to husbands and says, I want you to live with your wives according to knowledge. Now, let's see if we've ever heard a statement like this. I'm a man. I've obviously been around men. I'm one of 4 boys. I have 3 boys. Played sports. Okay? So I'm most likely to hear what? Men just can't understand women. Or women just can't understand men. Okay? Here's the first thing. God does not ask me to understand every person on the planet. But I summarily reject the notion that I cannot know my spouse. Well, we're just never going to understand it. Many times, all that is a cover for is what we said earlier. It's hard work, and it takes time and listening and molding and moving. God doesn't ask us to know everyone. He asks us to know one person to whom we have pledged the entirety of our lives. That's what he asks. And if God looks at husbands and says, you live with her according to knowledge, unless we're just obtuse old boys, we somehow found a way to convince her to marry us. We studied her somehow. We knew how she operated. The problem is we stop. Or we think, well, it's always changing. Of course she is. Of course you are. That's called growth. That's why you don't get a diploma that says I graduated from Understanding My Spouse School. That's what we want. We want to be able to get them figured out, put them in that box, and we don't have to do anything else except operate within the box. Instead of doing the hard work that it takes and self-examination and internal examination, and that when we choose, one of the things we talk about in premarital counseling is this. When you choose to marry your spouse, you're choosing to love 3 people. You're choosing to love the person your spouse used to be. Not saying you approve, not even that your spouse would approve of all the things they've done in the past, but you're choosing to accept everything that comes with them. You're promising to love them now for who they are. But you're also promising to love who they're becoming and to helping them become who they need to be. That's why some people say, well, felt like a bait and switch. We got married and then all of a sudden, no. Nothing changed. Nothing that fundamental, nothing that. But you see, we get content and we go to sleep. And we've put our marriages on autopilot. And then we can't always figure out why we're crashing. It was because we got content. So, as Christians, we have to learn in many areas of life to never be content. Constantly be pursuing the things that matter most. And I'm sure there are plenty of other things we could add to the list, and maybe we will at some other point. But tonight we would simply ask this question: are we complacent in our relationship with God? Look, if we're complacent in our relationship to the church, we think about that, we work through that, we pray about that to God, and we get back involved the way that we need to be. Or maybe we're complacent in our marriage. That's something we need to sit down with our spouse and talk to them, okay? We can, as a group of believers, we can help. We will do our best to help with any situation. But obviously, one of our biggest concerns is your relationship with God. And so, if a person is away from Jesus, away from God, if they will submit themselves to Him with a penitent faith, confessing Jesus to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of their sins, they enter into that relationship with God. Or maybe we have been struggling in that relationship. It's waning. Maybe that's something we can pray about together. Maybe that's something we can talk about in private. As we've always said, it's not the only opportunity right here, but it is an opportunity. And if someone would like to avail themselves of that opportunity, we'd be glad to help you as we stand and sing this song.